The Constitution of India. Contents. Preamble. Part 1. The Union and its territory. Articles 1. Name and territory of the Union. 2. Admission or establishment of new states. 2a. Sikkim to be associated with the Union. Omitted. 3. Formation of new states and alteration of areas, boundaries or names of existing states. 4. Laws made under Articles 2 and 3 to provide for the amendment of the first and the fourth schedules in supplemental, incidental and consequential matters. Part 2. Citizenship. 5. Citizenship at the commencement of the Constitution. 6. Rights of citizenship of certain persons who have migrated to India from Pakistan. 7. Rights of citizenship of certain migrants to Pakistan. 8. Rights of citizenship of certain persons of Indian origin residing outside India. 9. Persons voluntarily acquiring citizenship of a foreign state not to be citizens. 10. Continuance of the rights of citizenship. 11. Parliament to regulate the right of citizenship by law. Contents. Articles. E. Part 3. Fundamental rights. General. 12. Definition. 13. Laws inconsistent with or in derogation of the fundamental rights. Right to equality. 14. Equality before law. 15. Prohibition of discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex or place of birth. 16. Equality of opportunity in matters of public employment. 17. Abolition of untouchability. 18. Abolition of titles. Right to freedom. 19. Protection of certain rights regarding freedom of speech, etc. 20. Protection in respect of conviction for offences. 21. Protection of life and personal liberty. 21a. Right to education. 22. Protection against arrest and detention in certain cases. Right against exploitation. 23. Prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor. 24. Prohibition of employment of children in factories, etc. Right to freedom of religion. 25. Freedom of conscience and free profession, practice and propagation of religion. 26. Freedom to manage religious affairs. 27. Freedom as to payment of taxes for promotion of any particular religion. 28. Freedom as to attendance at religious instruction or religious worship in certain educational institutions. Contents. Articles. E. Cultural and educational rights. 29. Protection of interests of minorities. 30. Right of minorities to establish and administer educational institutions. 31. Compulsory acquisition of property, omitted. Saving of certain laws. 31a. Saving of laws providing for acquisition of estates, etc. 31b. Validation of certain acts and regulations. 31c. Saving of laws giving effect to certain directive principles. 31d. Saving of laws in respect of anti-national activities. Omitted. Right to constitutional remedies. 32. Remedies for enforcement of rights conferred by this part. 32a. Constitutional validity of state laws not to be considered in proceedings under Article 32. Omitted. 33. Power of Parliament to modify the rights conferred by this part in their application to forces, etc. 34. Restriction on rights conferred by this part while martial law is in force in any area. 35. Legislation to give effect to the provisions of this part. Part 4. Directive Principles of State Policy. 36. Definition. 37. Application of the principles contained in this part. 38. State to secure a social order for the promotion of welfare of the people. 39. Certain principles of policy to be followed by the state. 39a. Equal justice and free legal aid. Contents. Articles. IV. 40. Organization of village panchayats. 41. Right to work, to education and to public assistance in certain cases. 42. Provision for just and humane conditions of work and maternity relief. 43. Living wage, etc. For workers. 43A. Participation of workers in management of industries. 43B. Promotion of cooperative societies. 44. Uniform Civil Code for the citizens. 45. Provision for early childhood care and education to children below the age of 6 years. 46. Promotion of educational and economic interests of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and other weaker sections. 47. Duty of the state to raise the level of nutrition and the standard of living and to improve public health. 48. Organization of agriculture and animal husbandry. 48A. Protection and improvement of environment and safeguarding of forests and wildlife. 49. Protection of monuments and places and objects of national importance. 50. Separation of judiciary from executive. 51. Promotion of international peace and security. Part E were fundamental duties. 51A. Fundamental duties. PART versus the Union Chapter I. The Executive, the President and Vice President. 52. The President of India. 53. Executive power of the Union. 54. Election of President. Contents. Articles. V. 55. Manner of election of President. 56. Term of office of President. 57. Eligibility for re-election. 58. Qualifications for election as President. 59. Conditions of President's office. 60. Oath or affirmation by the President. 61. Procedure for impeachment of the President. 62. Time of holding election to fill vacancy in the office of President and the term of office of person elected to fill casual vacancy. 63. The Vice President of India. 64. The Vice President to be ex officio Chairman of the Council of States. 65. The Vice President to act as President or to discharge his functions during casual vacancies in the office or during the absence of President. 66. Election of Vice President. 67. Term of office of Vice President. 68. Time of holding election to fill vacancy in the office of Vice President and the term of office of person elected to fill casual vacancy. 69. Oath or affirmation by the Vice President. 70. Discharge of President's functions in other contingencies. 71. Matters relating to, or connected with, the election of a President or Vice President. 72. Power of President to grant pardons, etc. And to suspend, remit or commute sentences in certain cases. 73. Extent of executive power of the Union. Council of Ministers. 74. Council of Ministers to aid and advise President. 75. Other provisions as to ministers. The Attorney General for India. 76. Attorney General for India. Contents. Articles. V. Conduct of government business. 77. Conduct of business of the Government of India. 78. Duties of Prime Minister as respects the furnishing of information to the President, etc. Chapter 2. Parliament. General. 79. Constitution of Parliament. 80. Composition of the Council of States. 81. Composition of the House of the People. 82. Readjustment after each census. 83. Duration of Houses of Parliament. 84. Qualification for membership of Parliament. 85. Sessions of Parliament, prorogation and dissolution. 86. Right of President to address and send messages to Houses. 87. Special address by the President. 88. Rights of Ministers and Attorney General as respects Houses. Officers of Parliament. 89. The Chairman and Deputy Chairman of the Council of States. 90. Vacation and resignation of, and removal from, the office of Deputy Chairman. 91. Power of the deputy chairman or other person to perform the duties of the office of, or to act as, chairman. 92. The chairman or the deputy chairman not to preside while a resolution for his removal from office is under consideration. 93. The Speaker and Deputy Speaker of the House of the People. 94. Vacation and resignation of, and removal from, the offices of Speaker and Deputy Speaker. 95. Power of the Deputy Speaker or other person to perform the duties of the office of, or to act as, Speaker. Contents. Articles. V. 96. The Speaker or the Deputy Speaker not to preside while a resolution for his removal from office is under consideration. 97. Salaries and allowances of the Chairman and Deputy Chairman and the Speaker and Deputy Speaker. 98. Secretariat of Parliament. Conduct of business. 99. Oath or affirmation by members. 100. Voting in houses, power of houses to act notwithstanding vacancies and quorum. Disqualifications of members. 101. Vacation of seats. 102. Disqualifications for membership. 103. Decision on questions as to disqualifications of members. 104. Penalty for sitting in voting before making oath or affirmation under Article 99 or when not qualified or when disqualified. Powers, privileges and immunities of Parliament and its members. 105. Powers, privileges, etc. of the Houses of Parliament and of the members and committees thereof. 106. Salaries and allowances of members. Legislative procedure. 107. Provisions as to introduction and passing of bills. 108. Joint sitting of both houses in certain cases. 109. Special procedure in respect of money bills. 110. Definition of money bills. 111. Assent to bills. Procedure in financial matters. 112. Annual financial statement. 113. Procedure in Parliament with respect to estimates. 114. Appropriation bills. Contents. Articles. V. 115. Supplementary, additional or excess grants. 116. Votes on account, votes of credit and exceptional grants. 117. Special provisions as to financial bills. Procedure generally. 118. Rules of procedure. 119. Regulation by law of procedure in Parliament in relation to financial business. 120. Language to be used in Parliament. 121. Restriction on discussion in Parliament. 122. Courts not to inquire into proceedings of Parliament. Chapter 3. Legislative powers of the President. 123. Power of President to promulgate ordinances during recess of Parliament. Chapter IV. The Union Judiciary. 124. Establishment and Constitution of the Supreme Court. 124A. National Judicial Appointments Commission. 124B. Functions of Commission. 124C. Power of Parliament to make law. 125. Salaries, etc. of judges. 126. Appointment of Acting Chief Justice. 127. Appointment of ad hoc judges. 128. Attendance of retired judges at sittings of the Supreme Court. 129. Supreme Court to be a court of record. 130. Seat of Supreme Court. 131. Original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. 131A. Exclusive jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in regard to questions as to constitutional validity of central laws. Omitted. 132. Appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in appeals from high courts in certain cases. 133. Appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in appeals from high courts in regard to civil matters. 134. Appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in regard to criminal matters. Contents. Articles. AX. 134A. Certificate for Appeal to the Supreme Court. 135. Jurisdiction and powers of the Federal Court under existing law to be exercisable by the Supreme Court. 136. Special leave to appeal by the Supreme Court. 137. Review of judgments or orders by the Supreme Court. 138. Enlargement of the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. 139. Conferment on the Supreme Court of powers to issue certain writs. 139A. Transfer of certain cases. 140. Ancillary powers of the Supreme Court. 141. Law declared by Supreme Court to be binding on all courts. 142. Enforcement of decrees and orders of the Supreme Court and orders as to discovery, etc. 143. Power of the President to consult the Supreme Court. 144. Civil and judicial authorities to act in aid of the Supreme Court. 144A. Special provisions as to disposal of questions relating to constitutional validity of laws. Omitted. 145. Rules of Court, etc. 146. Officers and servants and the expenses of the Supreme Court. 147. Interpretation. CHAPTERV. Controller and Auditor General of India. 148. Controller and Auditor General of India. 149. Duties and powers of the Controller and Auditor General. 150. Form of accounts of the Union and of the States. 151. Audit Reports. Part 6 The States Chapter I. General. 152. Definition. Contents. Articles. X. Chapter 2. The Executive, the Governor. 153. Governors of States. 154. Executive power of state. 155. Appointment of Governor. 156. Term of office of Governor. 157. Qualifications for appointment as Governor. 158. Conditions of Governor's office. 159. Oath or affirmation by the Governor. 160. Discharge of the functions of the Governor in certain contingencies. 161. Power of Governor to grant pardons, etc. and to suspend, remit or commute sentences in certain cases. 162. Extent of executive power of state. Council of Ministers. 163. Council of Ministers to aid and advise Governor. 164. Other provisions as to ministers. The Advocate General for the State. 165. Advocate General for the State. Conduct of Government Business. 166. Conduct of Business of the Government of a State. 167. Duties of Chief Minister as respects the furnishing of information to Governor, etc. Chapter 3. The State Legislature. General. 168. Constitution of Legislatures in States. 169. Abolition or creation of legislative councils in states. 170. Composition of the legislative assemblies. Contents. Articles. She. 171. Composition of the legislative councils. 172. Duration of state legislatures. 173. Qualification for membership of the state legislature. 174. Sessions of the state legislature, prorogation and dissolution. 175. Right of Governor to address and send messages to the House or Houses. 176. Special address by the Governor. 177. Rights of Ministers and Advocate General as respects the Houses. Officers of the State Legislature. 178. The Speaker and Deputy Speaker of the Legislative Assembly. 179. Vacation and resignation of, and removal from, the offices of Speaker and Deputy Speaker. 180. Power of the Deputy Speaker or other person to perform the duties of the office of, or to act as, Speaker. 181. The Speaker or the Deputy Speaker not to preside while a resolution for his removal from office is under consideration. 182. The Chairman and Deputy Chairman of the Legislative Council. 183. Vacation and resignation of, and removal from, the offices of Chairman and Deputy Chairman. 184. Power of the Deputy Chairman or other person to perform the duties of the office of, or to act as, Chairman. 185. The Chairman or the Deputy Chairman not to preside while a resolution for his removal from office is under consideration. 186. Salaries and allowances of the Speaker and Deputy Speaker and the Chairman and Deputy Chairman. 187. Secretariat of State Legislature. Conduct of business. 188. Oath or affirmation by members. 189. Voting in houses, power of houses to act notwithstanding vacancies and quorum. Disqualifications of members. 190. Vacation of seats. Contents. Articles. Xi. 191. Disqualifications for membership. 192. Decision on questions as to disqualifications of members. 193. Penalty for sitting in voting before making oath or affirmation under Article 188 or when not qualified or when disqualified. Powers, privileges and immunities of state legislatures and their members. 194. Powers, privileges, etc. of the houses of legislatures and of the members and committees thereof. 195. Salaries and allowances of members. Legislative procedure. 196. Provisions as to introduction and passing of bills. 197. Restriction on powers of Legislative Council as to bills other than money bills. 198. Special procedure in respect of money bills. 199. Definition of money bills. 200. Assent to bills. 201. Bills reserved for consideration. Procedure in financial matters. 202. Annual financial statement. 203. Procedure in legislature with respect to estimates. 204. Appropriation bills. 205. Supplementary, additional or excess grants. 206. Votes on account, votes of credit and exceptional grants. 207. Special provisions as to financial bills. Procedure generally. 208. Rules of procedure. 209. Regulation by law of procedure in the legislature of the state in relation to financial business. Contents. Articles. Xi. 210. Language to be used in the legislature. 211. Restriction on discussion in the legislature. 212. Courts not to inquire into proceedings of the legislature. Chapter IV. Legislative power of the Governor. 213. Power of Governor to promulgate ordinances during recess of legislature. CHAPTERV. The High Courts in the States. 214. High Courts for States. 215. High Courts to be courts of record. 216. Constitution of High Courts. 217. Appointment and conditions of the office of a judge of a High Court. 218. Application of certain provisions relating to Supreme Court to High Courts. 219. Oath or affirmation by judges of High Courts. 220. Restriction on practice after being a permanent judge. 221. Salaries, etc. of judges. 222. Transfer of a judge from one high court to another. 223. Appointment of acting Chief Justice. 224. Appointment of additional and acting judges. 224A. Appointment of retired judges at sittings of high courts. 225. Jurisdiction of existing high courts. 226. Power of high courts to issue certain writs. 226A. Constitutional validity of central laws not to be considered in proceedings under Article 226. Omitted. 227. Power of superintendence over all courts by the High Court. 228. Transfer of certain cases to High Court. 228A. Special provisions as to disposal of questions relating to constitutional validity of state laws. Omitted. Contents. Articles. XIV. 229. Officers and servants and the expenses of high courts. 230. Extension of jurisdiction of high courts to union territories. 231. Establishment of a common high court for two or more states. 232. Articles 230, 231 and 232 substituted by Articles 230 and 231. Chapter V. Subordinate Courts 233. Appointment of District Judges. 233A. Validation of appointments of, and judgments, etc. Delivered by, certain district judges. 234. Recruitment of persons other than district judges to the judicial service. 235. Control over subordinate courts. 236. Interpretation. 237. Application of the provisions of this chapter to certain class or classes of magistrates. Part 7. Omitted, the states in Part B of the first schedule, 238. Omitted. Part 8, the Union Territories. 239. Administration of Union Territories. 239A. Creation of local legislatures or council of ministers or both for certain Union Territories. 239A. Special provisions with respect to Delhi. 239AB. Provision in case of failure of constitutional machinery. 239B. Power of administrator to promulgate ordinances during recess of legislature. 240. Power of president to make regulations for certain union territories. 241. High courts for union territories. 242. Coorg. Omitted. Part 9, the Panchayats. 243. Definitions. Contents. Articles. XV. 243A. Gram Sabha. 243B. Constitution of Panchayats. 243C. Composition of Panchayats. 243D. Reservation of seats. 243E. Duration of Panchayats, etc. 243F. Disqualifications for membership. 243G. Powers, authority and responsibilities of Panchayats. 243H. Powers to impose taxes by, and funds of, the Panchayats. 243I. Constitution of Finance Commission to review financial position. 243J. Audit of accounts of Panchayats. 243K. Elections to the Panchayats. 243L. Application to Union Territories. 243M. Part not to apply to certain areas. 243N. Continuance of existing laws in Panchayats. 243O. Bar to interference by courts in electoral matters. Part IXA, the municipalities. 243P. Definitions. 243Q. Constitution of municipalities. 243R. Composition of municipalities. 243S. Constitution and composition of wards committees, etc. 243T. Reservation of seats. 243U. Duration of municipalities, etc. 243V. Disqualifications for membership. 243W. Powers, authority and responsibilities of municipalities, etc. 243x. Power to impose taxes by, and funds of, the municipalities. 243y. Finance Commission. Contents. Articles. XVI. 243z. Audit of accounts of municipalities. 243za. Elections to the municipalities. 243 zettabytes. Application to Union Territories. 243zc. Part not to apply to certain areas. 243zd. Committee for District Planning. 243ze. Committee for Metropolitan Planning. 243zf. Continuance of existing laws in municipalities. 243zg. Bar to interference by courts in electoral matters. Part IXBTHE Cooperative Societies. 243zh. Definitions. 243zi. Incorporation of cooperative societies. 243zj. Number and term of members of board and its office bearers. 243zk. Election of members of board. 243zl. Supersession and suspension of board and interim management. 243zm. Audit of accounts of cooperative societies. 243zn. Convening of general body meetings. 243zo. Right of a member to get information. 243zp. Returns. 243zq. Offences and penalties. 243zr. Application to multi-state cooperative societies. 243zs. Application to Union Territories. 243zt. Continuance of existing laws. Part 10. The Scheduled and Tribal Areas. 244. Administration of Scheduled Areas and Tribal Areas. 244a. Formation of an autonomous state comprising certain tribal areas in Assam and creation of local legislature or council of ministers or both therefore. Contents. Articles. XVI. Part 11. Relations between the Union and the States. Chapter I. Legislative Relations, Distribution of Legislative Powers. 245. Extent of laws made by Parliament and by the legislatures of states. 246. Subject matter of laws made by Parliament and by the legislatures of states. 246a. Special provision with respect to goods and services tax. 247. Power of Parliament to provide for the establishment of certain additional courts. 248. Residuary powers of legislation. 249. Power of Parliament to legislate with respect to a matter in the state list in the national interest. 250. Power of Parliament to legislate with respect to any matter in the state list if a proclamation of emergency is in operation. 251. Inconsistency between laws made by Parliament under Articles 249 and 250 and laws made by the legislatures of states. 252. Power of Parliament to legislate for two or more states by consent and adoption of such legislation by any other state. 253. Legislation for giving effect to international agreements. 254. Inconsistency between laws made by Parliament and laws made by the legislatures of states. 255. Requirements as to recommendations and previous sanctions to be regarded as matters of procedure only. Chapter 2. Administrative Relations. General. 256. Obligation of states and the Union. 257. Control of the Union over states in certain cases. 257a. Assistance to states by deployment of armed forces or other forces of the Union. Omitted. 258. Power of the Union to confer powers, etc. on states in certain cases. Contents. Articles. XVI. 258a. Power of the states to entrust functions to the Union. 259. Armed forces in states in Part B of the first schedule. Omitted. 260. Jurisdiction of the Union in relation to territories outside India. 261. Public acts, records and judicial proceedings. Disputes relating to waters. 262. Adjudication of disputes relating to waters of interstate rivers or river valleys. Coordination between states. 263. Provisions with respect to an interstate council. Part 12. Finance, Property, Contracts and Suits Chapter I. Finance General. 264. Interpretation. 265. Taxes not to be imposed save by authority of law. 266. Consolidated funds and public accounts of India and of the states. 267. Contingency fund. Distribution of revenues between the Union and the states. 268. Duties levied by the Union but collected and appropriated by the states. 268A. Service tax levied by Union and collected by the Union and the states. Omitted. 269. Taxes levied and collected by the Union but assigned to the states. 269A. Levy and collection of goods and services tax in course of interstate trade or commerce. 270. Taxes levied and distributed between the Union and the states. 271. Surcharge on certain duties and taxes for purposes of the Union. 272. Taxes which are levied and collected by the Union and may be distributed between the Union and the states. Omitted. 273. Grants in lieu of export duty on jute and jute products. 274. Prior recommendation of President required to bills affecting taxation in which states are interested. Contents. Articles. 6. 275. Grants from the Union to certain states. 276. Taxes on professions, trades, callings and employments. 277. Savings. 278. Agreement with states in Part B of the first schedule with regard to certain financial matters. Omitted. 279. Calculation of net proceeds, etc. 279A. Goods and Services Tax Council. 280. Finance Commission. 281. Recommendations of the Finance Commission. Miscellaneous financial provisions. 282. Expenditure defrayable by the Union or a state out of its revenues. 283. Custody, etc. of consolidated funds, contingency funds and monies credited to the public accounts. 284. Custody of suitors' deposits and other monies received by public servants and courts. 285. Exemption of property of the Union from state taxation. 286. Restrictions as to imposition of tax on the sale or purchase of goods. 287. Exemption from taxes on electricity. 288. Exemption from taxation by states in respect of water or electricity in certain cases. 289. Exemption of property and income of a state from union taxation. 290. Adjustment in respect of certain expenses and pensions. 290A. Annual payment to certain Devasome funds. 291. Privy purse sums of rulers. Omitted. Chapter 2. Borrowing. 292. Borrowing by the Government of India. 293. Borrowing by states. Contents. Articles. XX. Chapter 3. Property, contracts, rights, liabilities. Obligations and suits. 294. Succession to property, assets, rights, liabilities and obligations in certain cases. 295. Succession to property, assets, rights, liabilities and obligations in other cases. 296. Property accruing by escheat or lapse or as bona vacantia. 297. Things of value within territorial waters or continental shelf and resources of the exclusive economic zone to west in the Union. 298. Power to carry on trade, etc. 299. Contracts. 300. Suits and proceedings. Chapter IV. Right to property. 300A. Persons not to be deprived of property save by authority of law. Part 13. Trade, commerce and intercourse within the territory of India. 301. Freedom of trade, commerce and intercourse. 302. Power of Parliament to impose restrictions on trade, commerce and intercourse. 303. Restrictions on the legislative powers of the Union and of the states with regard to trade and commerce. 304. Restrictions on trade, commerce and intercourse among states. 305. Saving of existing laws and laws providing for state monopolies. 306. Power of certain states in Part B of the first schedule to impose restrictions on trade and commerce. Omitted. 307. Appointment of authority for carrying out the purposes of Articles 301 to 304. Part 14. Services under the Union and the States. Chapter I. Services. 308. Interpretation. Contents. Articles. XXI. 309. Recruitment and conditions of service of persons serving the Union or a state. 310. Tenure of office of persons serving the Union or a state. 311. Dismissal, removal or reduction in rank of persons employed in civil capacities under the Union or a state. 312. All India services. 312A. Power of Parliament to vary or revoke conditions of service of officers of certain services. 313. Transitional provisions. 314. Provision for protection of existing officers of certain services. Omitted. Chapter 2. Public Service Commissions. 315. Public Service Commissions for the Union and for the States. 316. Appointment and term of office of members. 317. Removal and suspension of a member of a Public Service Commission. 318. Power to make regulations as to conditions of service of members and staff of the Commission. 319. Prohibition as to the holding of offices by members of Commission on ceasing to be such members. 320. Functions of Public Service Commissions. 321. Power to extend functions of Public Service Commissions. 322. Expenses of Public Service Commissions. 323. Reports of Public Service Commissions. Part XIVA Tribunals. 323A. Administrative Tribunals. 323B. Tribunals for other matters. Contents. Articles. XXII. Part 15 Elections. 324. Superintendence, direction and control of elections to be vested in an election commission. 325. No person to be ineligible for inclusion in, or to claim to be included in a special, electoral roll on grounds of religion, race, caste or sex. 326. Elections to the House of the People and to the legislative assemblies of states to be on the basis of adult suffrage. 327. Power of Parliament to make provision with respect to elections to legislatures. 328. Power of legislature of a state to make provision with respect to elections to such legislature. 329. Bar to interference by courts in electoral matters. 329A. Special provision as to elections to Parliament in the case of Prime Minister and Speaker. Omitted. Part 16. Special provisions relating to certain classes. 330. 330A. Reservation of seats for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the House of the People. Reservation of seats for women in the House of the People. 331. Representation of the Anglo-Indian community in the House of the People. 332. 332A. Reservation of seats for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the legislative assemblies of the states. Reservation of seats for women in the legislative assemblies of the states. 333. Representation of the Anglo-Indian community in the legislative assemblies of the states. 334. 334A. Reservation of seats and special representation to cease after certain period. Reservation of seats for women take effect. 335. Claims of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes to services and posts. Contents. Articles. XXII. 336. Special provision for Anglo-Indian community in certain services. 337. Special provision with respect to educational grants for the benefit of Anglo-Indian community. 338. National Commission for Scheduled Castes. 338A. National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. 338B. National Commission for Backward Classes. 339. Control of the Union over the administration of scheduled areas and the welfare of scheduled tribes. 340. Appointment of a commission to investigate the conditions of backward classes. 341. Scheduled castes. 342. Scheduled tribes. 342A. Socially and educationally backward classes. Part 17 Official Language Chapter I. Language of the Union 343. Official Language of the Union. 344. Commission and Committee of Parliament on Official Language. Chapter 2. Regional Languages. 345. Official Language or Languages of a State. 346. Official Language for communication between one state and another or between a state and the Union. 347. Special provision relating to language spoken by a section of the population of a state. Chapter 3. Language of the Supreme Court, High Courts, etc. 348. Language to be used in the Supreme Court and in the High Courts and for acts, bills, etc. 349. Special procedure for enactment of certain laws relating to language. Contents. Articles. XXIV. Chapter IV. Special directives. 350. Language to be used in representations for redress of grievances. 350A. Facilities for instruction in mother tongue at primary stage. 350B. Special Officer for Linguistic Minorities. 351. Director for Development of the Hindi Language. Part 18 Emergency Provisions. 352. Proclamation of Emergency. 353. Effect of Proclamation of Emergency. 354. Application of provisions relating to distribution of revenues while a proclamation of emergency is in operation. 355. Duty of the Union to protect states against external aggression and internal disturbance. 356. Provisions in case of failure of constitutional machinery in states. 357. Exercise of legislative powers under proclamation issued under Article 356. 358. Suspension of provisions of Article 19 during emergencies. 359. Suspension of the enforcement of the rights conferred by Part 3 during emergencies. 359A. Application of this part to the state of Punjab. Omitted. 360. Provisions as to financial emergency. Part 19 Miscellaneous. 361. Protection of President and Governors and Raj Pramukhs. 361A. Protection of publication of proceedings of Parliament and state legislatures. 361B. Disqualification for appointment on remunerative political post. 362. Rights and privileges of rulers of Indian states. Omitted. 363. Bar to interference by courts in disputes arising out of certain treaties, agreements, etc. 363A. Recognition granted to rulers of Indian states to seize and privy purses to be abolished. Contents. Articles XXV 364. Special provisions as to major ports and aerodromes. 365. Effect of failure to comply with, or to give effect to, directions given by the Union. 366. Definitions. 367. Interpretation. Part 20. Amendment of the Constitution. 368. Power of Parliament to amend the Constitution and procedure therefore. Part 21. Temporary, transitional and special provisions. 369. Temporary power to Parliament to make laws with respect to certain matters in the state list as if they were matters in the concurrent list. 370. Temporary provisions with respect to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. 371. Special provision with respect to the states of Maharashtra and Gujarat. 371A. Special provision with respect to the state of Nagaland. 371B. Special provision with respect to the state of Assam. 371C. Special provision with respect to the state of Manipur. 371D. Special provisions with respect to the state of Andhra Pradesh or the state of Telangana. 371E. Establishment of Central University in Andhra Pradesh. 371F. Special provisions with respect to the state of Sikkim. 371G. Special provision with respect to the state of Mizoram. 371H. Special provision with respect to the state of Arunachal Pradesh. 371I. Special provision with respect to the state of Goa. 371J. Special provisions with respect to the state of Karnataka. 372. Continuance in force of existing laws and their adaptation. 372A. Power of the President to adapt laws. Contents. Articles. XXVI. 373. Power of President to make order in respect of persons under preventive detention in certain cases. 374. Provisions as to judges of the Federal Court and proceedings pending in the Federal Court or before His Majesty in Council. 375. Courts, authorities and officers to continue to function subject to the provisions of the Constitution. 376. Provisions as to judges of high courts. 377. Provisions as to Controller and Auditor General of India. 378. Provisions as to Public Service Commissions. 378A. Special provision as to duration of Andhra Pradesh Legislative Assembly. 379. Provisions as to Provisional Parliament and the Speaker and Deputy Speaker thereof. Omitted. 380. Provision as to President. Omitted. 381. Council of Ministers of the President. Omitted. 382. Provisions as to provisional legislatures for states in Part A of the first schedule. Omitted. 383. Provision as to governors of provinces. Omitted. 384. Council of Ministers of the Governors. Omitted. 385. Provision as to provisional legislatures in states in Part B of the first schedule. Omitted. 386. Council of Ministers for states in Part B of the first schedule. Omitted. 387. Special provision as to determination of population for the purposes of certain elections. Omitted. 388. Provisions as to the filling of casual vacancies in the Provisional Parliament and Provisional Legislatures of the states. Omitted. 389. Provision as to bills pending in the Dominion legislatures and in the legislatures of provinces and Indian states. Omitted. Contents. Articles. XXVII. 390. Money received are raised or expenditure incurred between the commencement of the Constitution and the 31st day of March, 1950. Omitted. 391. Power of the President to amend the first and fourth schedules in certain contingencies. Omitted. 392. Power of the President to remove difficulties. Part 22. Short title, Commencement, Authoritative Text. In Hindi and Repeals. 393. Short title. 394. Commencement. 394A. Authoritative text in the Hindi language. 395. Repeals. Schedules. First schedule. I. The states. 2. The Union territories. Second schedule. Part A. Provisions as to the President and the Governors of States. Part B. Omitted. Part C. Provisions as to the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of the House of the People and the Chairman and the Deputy Chairman of the Council of States and the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of the Legislative Assembly and the Chairman and the Deputy Chairman of the Legislative Council of a State. Part D. Provisions as to the Judges of the Supreme Court and of the High Courts. Part E. Provisions as to the Controller and Auditor General of India. Third schedule. Forms of oaths or affirmations. Contents. Articles. XXVII. Fourth schedule. Allocation of seats in the Council of States. Fifth schedule. Provisions as to the administration and control of scheduled areas and scheduled tribes. Part A. General. Part B. Administration and control of scheduled areas and scheduled tribes. Part C. Scheduled areas. Part D. Amendment of the schedule. Sixth schedule. Provisions as to the administration of tribal areas in the states of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram. Seventh schedule. List I. Union list. List 2. State list. List 3. Concurrent list. Eighth schedule. Languages. Ninth schedule. Validation of certain acts and regulations. 10th schedule. Provisions as to disqualification on ground of defection. 11th schedule. Powers, authority and responsibilities of panchayats. 12th schedule. Powers, authority and responsibilities of municipalities, etc. Appendices. Appendix I. The Constitution, 100th Amendment, Act, 2015. Appendix II. The Constitution, Application to Jammu and Kashmir, Order, 2019. Appendix III. Declaration under Article 373 of the Constitution. The Constitution of India. Preamble. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a one, sovereign socialist secular democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the two, unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly this 26th day of November, 1949, do hereby adopt, enact and give to ourselves this Constitution. 1. Subs. By the Constitution, 42nd Amendment, Act, 1976, S. 2. For, Sovereign Democratic Republic, W.E.F., the 3rd of January 1977. 2. Subs. By S. 2. Ibid. For, Unity of the Nation, W.E.F., the 3rd of January 1977. 2. Part 1.